Hey there, this is Erica from Ever Educating, and this channel is all about teaching tips for the new college instructor. And recently I've been talking a lot about synchronous hybrid teaching, which is what I'm doing this semester. So having half my students on Zoom and half of them on in person. And so one of my commenters asked about class management strategies for this kind of hybrid teaching, because they're teaching high school English, which has a lot of similarities to what I'm teaching, which is college English or college writing. And so today I thought I'd go over some classroom management strategies for this synchronous hybrid classroom. And if you have your own tips, go ahead and let me know in the comments below so we can all share and learn from the experience. So my first suggestion for classroom management in a hybrid class is having the chat screen on at the whole time when you're on Zoom. And so I'm screen sharing a lot, so I make sure I actually have an iPad next to me, and I have that, I sign in and just have a chat open on there, while on my main computer screen, I'm doing the screen sharing and kind of moving between websites or whatever resources I'm using. And so you don't have to use the two monitors, you can just have the chat on the screen. It's really up to you to decide. But I make sure it's visible at all times, or that I'm constantly checking that tab if I'm not using my iPad, because a lot of students, they're muted, right? So if they have a quick question or something they want to clarify, or they want to chime in answering something, they can do so in the chat really easily. So I want to make sure I'm not missing any quick questions or confusions by saying, hey, you have any questions? And there's silence. I'd rather say like, hey, if you ever have any questions or something you want to clarify, just type it into the chat and I'll check it periodically. So key first is making sure you have that chat screen up. Let them know that it's public, that their people in class will see it too, so they know that. But I definitely do this every single class period when I get in and set everything up. Now the key issue I'm currently having, which is probably something you're having as well, is how do you get students in the class and on Zoom to communicate with each other or take part in the class discussion in a bit more of a natural way. And still something I'm trying to figure out. One thing I've just started doing is using a name randomizer for my Zoom students. And so I have a video on that came out on Tuesday that I'll link below. But basically, when I have a lot of them on Zoom and only a few in class is usually how it goes. And so the ones in class, when they're there, you can see the facial expression when you say, hey, who can answer this question? You can see, I can tell Sarah has something she wants to say, but she's not feeling too confident. I'll choose her versus maybe John, who looks like he's totally lost, or maybe, Elisa, who's looking like, I'm not really sure if I'm, clear on this. Often you see the facial expression and whether or not choosing them at random is likely to backfire, right? Because you don't want to put them on the spot, but at some point somebody has to speak. And so I always look at their body language, their expressions, and then choose people who look that they have something to say, or people who seem like they're on the ball and just don't want to volunteer to talk unless they're called on. But when they're on Zoom, if I'm screen sharing, you can't see them. And even if I'm not, most of them aren't using the webcam, or they only use it when they're actually speaking. If I call on them and then they turn it on. So I can't really tell from their facial expressions or body language if they are ready to answer the question. So what I've told students is, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, like at random, and like I'm always the one choosing, okay, well this time I'll choose, John, right? So what I did was I created a name randomizer, and I'm like, all right, if you're on Zoom, then what I'm going to do is if no one's volunteering to answer, I'm just going to click this button, it'll spin or it'll go and it'll tell me who I should pick on, right? Who I should pick to speak first. And so if you're in class in person and your name is prompted, then you don't have to go, because I'm going to be alternating between people on Zoom and people in person. But for the people in person, again, I can use that body language. But if you're on Zoom, right, then I'm going to just use this, so I'm not being, biased about who I'm picking on, right? I'm just saying, all right, the computer says this person. And if it says that same person again in the same conversation, I'll just skip them. I won't require them to speak twice when they're not volunteering. But so this is something I'm trying out to make sure that it's a bit more fair on the Zoom ones, because I don't want to keep choosing at random and hoping I get somebody. I forewarn them, hey, we're going to use this tool now, so you really have to be ready at all times. Make sure you're focusing, and if you don't know the answer, that's fine. Tell me, I'm unsure. Can you clarify? I think maybe this, but maybe not. So that's okay too. You don't have to know the answer, but be prepared, because now I'm literally using a tool to pick people who are on Zoom. But I still alternate, like I said, somebody on Zoom, somebody in person, back and forth, unless I have 4 in person and 12 on Zoom, then I might do 2 to 1, right? And so that's something else I'm doing as well. Now, what's also helping to get the students in person and students on Zoom communicating with me at the same time is using tools like Mentimeter or Pear Deck. And so I have a video on those two as well that I'll link below. But basically here, what I can do is I can have a slide that asks a question, and then students just, sign in basically using a website and a passcode, like you would with Kahoot, for example. And then they answer the question using their phones if they're in class, or using their laptop or their phone if they're at home on Zoom. And so I can get all of their answers at once. It's not like, I'm gonna ask you first and then you. It's like, no, everybody sign into this website, put in this code, and answer this question. And they can answer it anonymously, or they can put in their name if you want them to put in their name, right? And so this way I can say, okay, I've asked this question and I'm getting responses from all of them at once. So now I can say, great point, John. Yes, I agree this. Or, Sarah, can you speak more about that? And if they're anonymous, I can say, well, 3 of you mentioned this. Who's that? Who are these people, right? If you don't mind, who said this and why did you say that? Because obviously there's others who agree with you. Okay, so it's a way of getting information from them all at once, rather than having to figure out like calling them individually when they might not want to speak. I'm having more success with, here's a slide, just type in your answer. You don't have to verbalize it until later on in the discussion. And so small group work isn't really possible for the students in class because they're so far apart from each other. But what I have done is I had students do an activity, and I had 3 in person and 18 on Zoom. And so I broke out the people on Zoom into 2 breakout rooms, and then the ones in person, we were one group. And so I went through the activity, said, okay, group 1, group 2, group 3, this is what you're going to be doing. You're putting in your answers into one Google Doc. We each have our own page. So take 10 minutes to answer this prompt, and then we'll come back and we'll discuss it all as a class. And so while small group isn't possible in class, I realized that if you're only getting 5, 6, even like 9 or 10 students in class, and you have 15, 18 on Zoom, then what you can do is you can just make the whole class one group and then divide the rest of them on Zoom into 2 or however many you want. And so that's one way where you can do still small group work, even if the ones in class don't actually get divided into more, units. And so that's something I've only done a couple times, but I found it went pretty well. So it's something that you might want to try if you've been wanting to do small group work, but haven't figured out, well, how can you possibly do that when you can't have them anywhere near each other when they're in person? Now, one key issue that I'm still trying to figure out is how to have people in person communicate the ones who are on Zoom in a conversation or in a class activity. I haven't really done this before because it's not key yet to what we're doing in class, but a couple ideas would be either to have the gallery view on the computer projected and then just literally say, Sarah in person and John on Zoom, I want you to do this activity. It's going to have 3 parts to it. The first part, Sarah, you'll answer. The second part, John, you'll answer. And then in the shared Google Doc where you're answering these questions, together you're going to answer part C. And so you're going to have to kind of like chat with each other in Google Docs to create that answer, right? And so that's slow going. It is an activity that'll take time, but that's one option, using Google Docs. Another option would be just having the gallery view up and just saying, all right, I'm going to pair you up in person and on Zoom, and you're going to kind of have a debate about this topic. And so the topic is this. Take a few minutes to think about your points. One of you is going to talk pro, one of you is going to talk con, and then you have them, debate, right? So the person, let's say on Zoom, goes first. They're on the screen. They say their spiel. Like, all right, the person in person says their spiel, and then go back and forth. So you might have a debate, might be the best way to go if you want to create that communication across the screen, and just have them projected, right? And so hopefully they'll be in the webcam, but even if not, you can still do that one-on-one. Not so much, obviously, larger groups. And so that's one avenue of getting that communication between the in-person and online people if you don't want to use the Google Slides approach, which obviously takes a lot more time. Now, another option is to use homework to accomplish this communication between students. And so, for example, my students will peer review each other's work for every major unit, and that's something they'll do at home. I'll give them a guided list of questions to answer about each of their documents, but then what they have to do is, they can answer them. Obviously, you can just exchange papers and then comment, fill out the forms, and then, submit it to me and submit it to your classmate who you're paired with. But, you can also get on Zoom and do it together, right? So kind of talk to each other through it. So that's another way of peer reviewing. You're still gonna have to answer that sheet, but you might want to actually communicate with your partner in person so you can clarify points by doing it that way, right? And so I'm not going to have them record themselves speaking or anything like that. They don't have to prove to me that they've done that. They just have to fill out the form. But I am going to suggest it might be helpful to actually talk to them either via phone call, via email, or via Zoom, Google Meets, however they want to do it. That is an option for them because it is a homework assignment. They're not actually doing it in class. So that way, when I assign classmates to do this, I can pick, who's going to be assigned with who. Maybe I'll have someone that's in person on one day with a person who's on Zoom on that same day. So they're never supposed to meet, in class, in person because of how it's designed. But they can get to know that classmate, right? Who knows, might be their future best friend, right? So I do want to create that communication between them. And I think homework is an avenue of doing that. So I might have, here's a group, activity to do, collaborate with this, create a discussion post, create a video, create a Google Doc answering this prompt, and you have these people in your class to do this with. So go ahead and figure out, do you want to Zoom call them? Do you want to, meet them in person and socially distance, right? At the library, for example, or what, avenue do you want to choose? It's up to you, but you can do group work and get to know your classmates in that way. And so obviously I'd always recommend Zoom or Google Meets for this, but it's a way, again, for them to get to know each other and, hopefully make some new friends from their classmates. And then one other thing that I've been noticing is that a lot of my students get to class after I've already taken attendance when they're on Zoom. And so what I've done now is I take attendance in the beginning. If you're there, you should be, right? But then at the end of class, I'll take attendance again for the people who are on Zoom. So like if you came in after you took attendance, let me know so I can mark you as late, but having been there. And so that way they know that they had to stay to the end of the class period to ensure that, okay, I didn't just come in 15 minutes late and leave 25 minutes, after that. I was there the rest of the time after that 15 minutes. Because if you're not there at the end of class, then I wouldn't have known to mark you. So that's one way that I'm almost taking double attendance every day to make sure that I'm getting everybody on the list who did show up. So I do use a waiting room function to make sure I hear when someone joins in and I hear when somebody leaves, right? Because I definitely want to keep, that conscious of that throughout the whole class period, so I'm not losing students immediately after take attendance, right? And so they know it chimes when they come in and out. But one thing you might want to do is take attendance at the end of class and not just at the beginning, so you don't miss any of those stragglers. If you're like really in the zone of teaching, you let them in, but you don't actually take attendance right at that moment. You keep going and keep the flow as much as you can, and then at the end they can say, hey, I am here. Now these are just some ideas, and if you like them, please click like below and let me know, and subscribe if you haven't yet. But if you have your own ideas for classroom management in the Synchronous hybrid course, I would really love to know them, and I'm sure other viewers would too. So go ahead and comment below with that information as well. What's your top tip for class management in a hybrid course?